Hello, my name is Heath Gascoigne, and I'm the host of the Business Transformation Podcast. And this is the show for business transformators who are part business strategists, part business designers, part collaborators, and part negotiators. Business transformators have moved past just business design and includes oversight of implementation of those business designs and business transformations, and includes stakeholder management, coordination, and negotiation. If you work in strategy development and implementation and work to ensure that that is aligned to the business design and technology, then you're probably a business transformator. This is a show where we speak to industry experts and professionals to share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you start, turn around, and grow your business transformation. Welcome to the Business Transformation Podcast. And in this episode, we're talking to one of those industry experts. We are speaking to Vibhas Ratanjee. I hope I pronounced that right, Vibhas. So Vibhas is a senior practice expert at Gallup, based in Los Angeles, California. Vibhas specializes in organization development, cultural change, M&A integration, and executive level engagement strategies, including strengths-based leadership and succession management. Vibhas is also an executive coach and leadership consultant to senior executives and CEOs. Vibhas works extensively in the healthcare, retail, and financial services sector. Vibhas is a well-known speaker and author, and has contributed to several articles on leadership and organizational development, as well as new technology, how that will alter the future of work and the customer experience. His writings, research, and work have featured in several global publications, including the Gallup Business Journal, Forbes, and the Harvard Business Review. Vibhas is also a contributor to the American Journal of Managed Care, where he writes about healthcare technology and healthcare employee experience. Vibhas also serves as advisory board member to the University of California, Riverside's Executive Design Thinking Program. Vibhas, thank you for your time. It's great to have you here. You have to be probably, now you have great background in terms of both practical experience, but Gallup itself is well known in its research and analysis of the market and trends. So, really good to have you on board.
Thanks for having me, Keith. It's a pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so you've got a vast experience there. Healthcare, which we covered that quite extensively. We're still going because it's still very topical subject right now. But so we can keep the agenda contained, because we can carry a lot there. We'll cover a lot, because I know Gallup covers a lot of market and market data and insights. So for the benefit of us and the viewers, we'll stick to, let's say, agility, culture, and Gallup's findings about transforming culture to achieve agility, which, if it's possible, and how do you do that? And then we'll get into some questions about some probing questions. We can delve a little bit deeper. So first off, agility right now, I think, my personal experience is when I go into projects and programs and with clients, and they talk about, yes, we're agile. And I think what they've caught onto this name, and it means different things to different people. What do you find?
Absolutely. I mean, there are probably as many definitions of agility as people trying to define it.
Yep.
So
yes.
It's certainly a moving away from a buzzword to actual practice. But there's a lot of confusion around what it actually means. A lot of Gallup's work is in the area of agile culture and building an agile culture. And I think that's really important. So the way we define agility is it's process and mindset. And I think both of them are incredibly important. So when you think about doing agile, there's something people talk about a lot. I do agile, which means you do scrum teams and you do lean and so on and so forth. That's important. That's the process. But being agile is mindset.
Yep.
So when we work with organizations in developing an agile culture, we focus on both the process and mindset. And that's incredibly important.
It's interesting there, because I think the mindset part is completely overlooked. People will go and follow a process or attend the classic agile ceremonies. They have these things called stand-ups or scrums, and they turn up every morning, and the intention originally was, if you're going to talk about 3 things: what you did yesterday, what you plan to do, and your roadblocks. And then sometimes it gets a bit out of hand and you're telling your life story, and it's instead of a 5-minute stand-up, because you're supposed to be standing up, everyone's sitting down, and then you next thing, it's not a scrum, it's, you know, it's everyone telling their whole life story. But then you get people that add what you call them, agilists. They're really people that are let's say deep in the philosophy of agile. And if you're not doing agile by the book, maybe the 12 principles, then you're not doing agile at all, and therefore you've bastardized it, and then people get upset because you're not following agile. But I think if we step back to what you just said about mindset, I think first and foremost, like I tell my students, is that, you know, first and foremost, agile is about a mindset. It's about doing things iteratively, quickly, getting them out and iterating and getting feedback and constant feedback and then update those and iterate. You know, however you do that, whether you want to do scrums or your scrums is classic scrums or it's another type of stand-up. But first and foremost, it is, you know, I think the done is better than perfect mindset, as to get away from the perfectionist mindset. That would be getting away from waterfall requirements of everything is very clear, gated, and, you know, we cannot proceed past this point until we know 100% with absolute clarity. But that's great. If the world didn't change around it, then, you know, then that's where agile comes in.
It's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of what I call agile purists who want to, like you said, you know, follow the process and so on, which is great, you know, because it's, you know, there is a method to the madness when you think about agility and agile working. But you can practice the best agile tactics from the playbook and yet not have a culture that supports agility. That's possible, you know, because you're so focused and fixated on the process. I'll give you some numbers. So I mentioned agility is process and mindset. So we did a big survey in the European Union and the US to try to understand, well, how many employees in an organization truly feel that their organizations, one, have the process for agility and mindset. And what we're really looking for is kind of those who feel both exist, you know, both process and mindset exist. Let me give you some numbers here. We'd consider those who say both exist, process and mindset, as agile. Somewhat is one is there, but the other is not, is kind of partly agile. And then, of course, if those employees who say, well, neither process or mindset exist, are not agile. The number for the US is 18%. So 18% of employees feel, exactly, that their organizations are fully agile. About 59% feel not agile. And the number for UK is and I want to share the UK number with you for sure. It's 13%. It's even lower than the US number.
Okay.
So if organizations are just focusing on, like I said, you know, the fundamentals of agile, which is of course very important, and yet not creating that ecosystem that supports fast decision making and empowerment, and we'd say a culture of coaching and feedback, then all that great agile purity is not worth much.
Oh yeah. So so if only a quarter of very similar stats, but the UK is lower, that they as organizations, and then if we, you know, extrapolated that out to industry to then population, then, you know, all the singing and dancing and banging on the drum, agile, and then you ask them, how are you feeling agile? And they only say, well, only a quarter of the people actually feel like it's agile. Then, maybe we should step back and say, what are the benefits of being agile or agility as opposed to currently? Well, if we look at, let's say, the pandemic, for example, how in the last 2 years that came on really fast, or those that knew about it or didn't know about it, came on really fast. And then organizations needed to adopt and adapt quickly. And if you weren't, let's say, agile, then you couldn't adapt quickly. Like the working from home is, you know, one that was like a novelty, and now it's like almost everyone who could and can work from home does. But if you weren't agile and didn't have the ability to do that, then you would be probably, lack of a better word, dead in water.
Yeah, I think those organizations who before the pandemic truly had an agile culture probably did better than
Mm.
those who just had it in the name of process.
Yeah.
And with the pandemic, it's kind of interesting because you've got to translate everything we know about agility to the virtual
Mm.
scenario. So you think about sprints and stand-ups being done virtually, and both you and I know that that doesn't work. You can't do stand-ups virtually and have the same level of impact.
Mm.
I think
That's it.
organizations who have that as a foundational level, a culture of agility, I think they would have probably done stand-ups virtually and still been very effective. But I do
Mm.
feel that for agility to really work, we need people back into the office
Oh,
and working there. That's going to be
I'm
so
going to quote
important.
you
And
on that.
hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, I'm going to quote you on that because I think the silent victim in the middle of all this about working from home and everyone's excited. Yes, I get to work from home and the freedom. I don't have to travel. But the thing that is getting that is no one is a spokesperson for is the culture. And I think what will happen is, and I've had a couple of people comment on some posts that I've done. Actually, back in Australia, the program director commented on, we are all fully 100% now. This is a few years back now, so it's about maybe 10, 15 years. And he said, oh no, we're well, since I worked with him, and he said, oh, and since now we are 100% working from home, remote, but we're only going to come together for a meal. And I said, so why don't you just sit at your desks and on the computer and have your meals at your desk on watching on the screen? He goes, oh no, we have to be together. So you have to be together, just have a meal. What do you do? Do you not see the similarities of the comradeship that you develop being in the same room, and the bonds that you develop, and the teamwork and the collaborative working and the
Absolutely.
culture? That's where it's developed, in the room, in the building, not this. And I see that the culture is the silent victim, and no one's waving the flag for culture. Go, you watch this, the culture's going to get
No,
destroyed.
I think that's true. And you know what? This shift to work from home and remote, I think it's here to stay. So I mean,
Mm.
we got our best researchers to estimate, looked at all our data to estimate, what happened in the future. And our estimate is that there's going to be a 37% reduction of in-person days. That's going to be there. So that's a shift that's happening. But I think what will happen in the future is this hybrid work, where you're actually kind of doing a 3-2. So you're doing 3 days in the office, maybe 2 days working remotely, and so on, or some variation of that. I think that's welcome because so you're saying that when you're at work, when you're in person, when you can collaborate, you maximize that.
Yeah.
And when you think about agility, you're maximizing the time in the office, even though you're kind of, I think about our research shows that about 5 in 10 would prefer some kind of hybrid working, which is great. Hybrid work is fantastic because that's where the culture, kind of translating culture and the rituals and the symbols and everything that is associated with culture to this kind of Zoom remote, it's not always optimal. So I think that hybrid agile working needs to be redefined.
Oh yeah. I think is there two types of hybrid. There is like organizations who have a central head office, but they also have satellite, which they may have now even brought or leased out like a co-working site. And instead of people commuting all the way to the head office, now they can commute to a local satellite co-working, and then they instead of working in the office and they're not working at home, they're working in this co-working location. Is that another version of hybrid?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think clearly you'll see that even infrastructure and offices will change. I think there'll be fewer cubicles and there'll be more collaborative working spaces, for instance. That's the future. And I think that's welcome because, already we were going away from offices to kind of open spaces and training rooms and collaboration spaces and all that. I think more effort needs to be put in there, where employees feel good about going back to work. I mean, they're calling it the returnship, not the internship, but the returnship.
Oh, returnship.
How do we get employees back? Yeah. And that thing, and at Gallup, we talk about kind of the workplace value proposition. So companies need to build this workplace value proposition to attract employees back to work, back to the office, give them a reason to return. And the reason to return is all the stuff that you mentioned, Heath, like collaboration, that camaraderie that goes with it. We need to reconnect with that human interaction and human connection that's obviously been missing for the past 2 years.
It raises a good question about, we talk about culture. It's pretty hard to define what culture is, isn't it? What is culture? Ways of working? Well, there's like agile. Yeah.
Culture is again so kind of intangible. But what we know about culture, we have a very easy definition for culture. We define it as the way things get done in an organization.
The way we do things around it. The way we do things around it.
That's as simple as that. So it's a very functional definition of culture, I guess. But I really think of culture as emergent. It's ever evolving, and it's very unique to an organization. So, sometimes I've seen organizations try to kind of define culture in very stereotypical ways, like you're a warrior culture or you're a servant culture. That doesn't matter. Culture is who you are. So I think that's going to be important. I think culture and how it gets represented as behaviors. And the right behaviors is important. That's what you need to be kind of focusing on. I'll talk about, we talk about culture a lot at Gallup in the work we do with organizations, but the term we use is organizational identity, which includes two additional things. Identity. So it's not just culture, because culture sometimes tends to be very insular, like this is who we are, right? But how are you seen by customers? How are you perceived? So that's the second component of organizational identity. The first is culture. And that's brand.
And brand.
And the third one is purpose, which is the why. So when you start thinking about culture broadly, you need to think about not just culture, but brand and purpose as well. More so today when the why for an organization is becoming increasingly important.
The purpose-driven organization, where there is some, what do we call it, social and economic, ESG. What's the acronym?
ESG. But again, more than a buzzword, everybody's talking about ESG right now and so on. What does it actually mean to you? And not just tokenism, like, hey, we are, ESG is a focus and it's look at what we're doing and so on. But having the organization really kind of every level of the organization, leaders, managers, employees, together believe in that purpose, believe in the ESG purpose, and actually do more to uplift society or communities or markets and economies and so on. I think that needs to be done.
Not what is it? It's like, back in that year 2000, it was the vaporware of technology that, you could tell a story, but it did nothing, or it didn't even exist. So, I think it's like and some organizations might have this thing about values, and it is espoused values versus enacted values. We say this, but however, we do not do that. So maybe the intention was there, but the execution is a little bit lacking, for a better word, or maybe it was just for marketing that they talked about it, but they had no intention of doing it.
The values question is an interesting one. So if you think about an organization with values like respect, integrity, teamwork, and excellence, you think about this organization, you think that's a wonderful organization to work with. You value teamwork and so on. These were the values of Enron. You remember Enron?
Oh, yes, Enron. Yes, the big Enron. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what buzzwords you put in your value definitions. In fact, our research says that a quarter of employees, about 23%, only 23% can strongly agree that they can apply the organization's value to the work they do. So you can keep talking about values, but unless you actually translate them into behaviors and guidelines and guiding principles, it's just a bunch of words on the wall in your corporate headquarters, right?
So someone probably an advisory consultancy came in and said, this is going to be really good for you, and so you should do this. However, and then they left. And then it was up to the CMT, the senior management team, to come up with what does that mean and how do we implement it? And then it kind of fell apart.
Yeah, I think values needs to be something that everybody understands. And one of the things in my work with values and helping organizations define values, I do not work just with the leadership team, because that's the narrowest way you can define leadership team, what they call the retreat, right? Like, the leaders come into a room, lock the door, and come out, voila, these are our values. But really a participative approach. So like, ask employees what they value the most. Ask employees about high point experiences they've had. Ask employees why they joined the organization in the first place. They'll tell you, what they value the most. So that kind of participative approach is really important. Otherwise, it's just, the senior leaders kind of sitting in their ivory towers and telling people what you should believe it.
I was going, the guys upstairs. The guys upstairs who got together on as exactly as you said, a retreat, and brainstormed a few ideas that were probably given to them by the consultants that ran that, facilitated that thing. Okay. So there seems to be, both with agile and maybe values and maybe culture, that there is probably exactly that. There, people talk about it, but the execution isn't as good. If there's 17 or 15% of staff and organizations think that they can do and are doing agile, going, no, you're not really. So where's the opportunity there? How, if businesses could be, what are they doing well and what are they not doing?
Yeah, I think organizations need to kind of look internally and understand where the barriers are to not just the process of agility, like we talked about the culture of agility. And typically you need to kind of first determine kind of the from to the to, like what is your from to? Like, where are you today and where are you trying to go? I think that's
the current state and future state. Yep.
The current state and the future state, and in consulting lingo. But it's sometimes it's as simple as that. But and typically when we go into an organization, we do what's called a culture audit of sorts. Kind of go in and really truly understand how culture is lived on the ground, and not just at the top levels. You got to go really deep into the organization.
Down to operations
and get the operations. I think that's so important. And from there, you'll actually see that culture is multidimensional, and there's both good and bad to culture. For example, I'll give you an example. So one organization that I've recently worked with, it was very clear that they have a very relationship-driven culture, so relationship orientation. So the good parts of that culture, of course, are when you think about agility, people working together, people having great camaraderie, and very familial culture and so on. But the same cultural attribute like relationship also has the dark side, that, like, who matters the most. There's groupism, there's herd mentality, So this when you think about agility and you're kind of trying to go in and you start putting just the process, first you need to understand whether the organization is ready to receive an agile culture. Then you got to start looking at that dichotomous, multi-layered approach of culture. And the mistake a lot of executives make is, let's fix culture. Let's go and let's do this and all of that. It's not easy. It's not easy to fix culture. You've existed like that for years. You can't just come in and start doing something different.
Well, that's the old. That's it. So that's the old saying about culture eats strategy for breakfast. You might have the best strategy, even the most money to execute that strategy, but if your culture doesn't support it, then good luck to you. It's like that is literally dead in the water.
I agree. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, and culture eats process for lunch, something like that. But I think that's the thing, starting with that deep understanding of who you are, it's going to be so important before you start putting any kind of process in place.
Okay, so I missed that because I'm writing a lot of notes here. So what eats breakfast? What eats for breakfast? process.
I'd say, I mean, this quote is kind of attributed to Peter Drucker, right? And I don't know whether he actually said this, but there's a lot of stuff that says actually he didn't. But anyway, culture, if culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think culture eats process for lunch. Is what I was trying to say.
Process it's for like, lunch, yeah. You know, there is, and talk about, see, I like to look at the bigger organizations as, you know, let's say spearheads or, you know, indicators of where the market may want to go as leading indicators, like Google, they just brought $1 billion business a building here in London, in King's Cross, and for their staff. And so I remember not too long ago that it was both Apple, well, 3 of them, Apple, Facebook, and Google, were saying that there's no requirement for their staff to return to the office. And now we've just bought $1 billion building to bring our staff. Like, wait a minute, that's not working from home. That's, you know, that's sending a very clear signal that everyone's coming back in the office. So what have you learned from maybe this last 2 years? You've got the ability to capture a lot of data for a lot of things in both your organization and the world. Maybe you've got some leading indicators yourself, and that's a big signal to say, hey, we're moving back in the office. And maybe this hybrid model isn't as good as or cracked up as it's, you know, sold or touted to be. Especially now we've spent a significant investment to bring everyone back into an office.
Yeah, no, I think I really think that I'd see that as a welcome sign. I see that as a welcome sign that there's still you know, a lot of interest in working from office at least some of the time. Yeah, and I think that's important because although we talk about work from home being something that has really created a lot of difference for people, and it has for me as well. You know, as you can see, I'm speaking to you from home and not the office. But at the same time, our research it's interesting. There's this well-being engagement paradox that we talk about. So what's happened with remote workers is that overall engagement has gone up. So when I say engagement, I mean employee engagement. So how you feel about the work you do, that's gone up. But well-being has not necessarily gone up. Well-being has actually gone down. So what's happening is that high levels of stress, even when you think about working from home, do exist. So I think that balance between well-being and engagement, connection with work, connection with your life, and, you know, when we define well-being, we don't only talk about physical well-being because that's typically what people talk about. We think about other elements of well-being as well. We wrote a book called Well-Being at Work that we published recently, and, you know, there's other elements of well-being. Well-being at work. So
okay, we'll put the link in the show notes there. The well-being at work.
Sure.
So there's two parts of that. So I think really the wellness, and engagement, and wellness being. So
so well-being and engagement. But even well-being it's multidimensional. Like there's social well-being, there's community well-being, there's financial well-being, there's career well-being. You know, all these elements together comprise well-being.
Okay, and engagement.
So that's the key.
Yeah. So engagement being how well they're engaging with the organization. Are they disconnected? They feel like they're part of a team. They were maybe even respected, valued. Okay. You know, I think, and I was just speaking to a client about the effort they went to through the lockdown. There are some people in the last 2 years that have never stepped into the office, and or new starters, and they've never stepped into the office in 2 years, because they didn't need to. But the way they did the onboarding was sending out their laptop, and it was open. It was like an unboxing experience of getting a new Apple, and everything felt like that you were welcomed. It was, and even they were saying that they had a budget for monitors and chairs that they could go buy or shop where they wanted to, make their time at home in the office, their home office, more enjoyable, and that everything, all the connectivity to the different apps and all the messaging was like, no problems. And they said that the effort they went, and they had ongoing like weekly well-being calls, to even group and individual. So whoa, you guys are way out. And they got gift bags, I think they said. I said, wow. I said, yeah. So the engagement was very strong, and then I think there is, which they they're talking to me because they need to do a transformation. And now they're finding they can't transform because the culture is so strong that they like the way they work now. So whoa, okay, so now you've almost created your own beast. Now you want to change the beast, you can't. So interesting.
Yeah. I think that I like that idea about well-being and onboarding people in the virtual environment. I think about it as a 3-2, like 3 days in the hybrid working environment. I'd say onboarding, I think it needs to be in person. If it can be with all the, kind of the safe health and safety standards upheld. And I see a lot of organizations doing that. So in fact, you can imagine when you kind of come in to work, you're onboarded, there's a conversation with your manager and so on. And as part of the conversation, there's a conversation about your well-being, about working remotely and, who do you have connections with? What other resources available to you? Yes. Can you phone a friend if you need to? Who is that friend? That kind of thing. So it's almost like setting up that human connection. Because I think a lot of employees were, over the last 2 years, have been onboarded via this computer screen. Yeah. And I think that there's a disconnection to everything. There's a disconnection to the purpose of the organization. There's a disconnection with your work, with your manager, and so on. Human connections matter, and I think somewhere there, when we go back and we will go back to the workplace, it has to be in that hybrid model where, as I mentioned, maximize moments at work, in the office, where you have great resources, great managers, great coaches who are helping you. And then you take all that energy when you work the 2 or 3 days from remote. Home. That balance is going to be important.
Well, that reminds me of when I did my MBA back in Australia, the executive MBA. And so what happened in that final year is that we would spend a week or week and a half, 4 times a year together on site, on the campus. And these workshops were almost 24 hours. It was by crack of dawn to almost the crack of dawn in the morning. And we did that for a week and a half. And then we went back to different our cities where we were around the country, and we worked remotely. But because we built that bond of just not so that cracking through the work, but being put to work, that we had built that strong teamwork ethic that we were. It's almost like, although we were remote, it was almost like we were in the room all together because we'd built that intensive friendship and collaboration because we were there together. So I think there is a good element of that hybrid, some in the office, some out. But I want to talk to you about, because for those that don't want to come back to the office, what is the latest trend? You talked about the returnship, but what is the other one? The Great Resignation.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Great Resignation. Obviously, people have talked about it quite a bit. It's got a lot of press. And we think that it's not really the Great Resignation as much as the Great Discontent. I think that's the one to kind of talk about, because I talked about employee engagement, and our recent polling shows that in the US about 1 in 3 are engaged. Employees are engaged. That's a pretty low number. And incidentally, that's a number that hasn't changed, largely unchanged, for the past 10 years. We've been polling this for quite a long time. So imagine all those changes that have happened, all the technological changes. There's one number we've not been able to move. About 16% of US employees are actively disengaged.
Disengaged.
Actively disengaged is the label, sometimes that's used. And, there's an acronym we use for the actively disengaged sometimes, and that is CAVE dwellers, CAVE, CAVE dwellers, where CAVE stands for constantly against virtually everything.
So constantly. against
against
virtually
virtually
everything.
everything. So you'd say whatever your engaged employees are building, you know, uh, 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 there's a lot of destruction that's happening with actively disengaged employees. By that, I don't mean that actively disengaged employees don't want to be engaged or that they're bad employees. They're not.
Yep. Yep.
They've not been engaged. Employees walk into work neutral. It's the
Yep.
organization and the culture and everything else, and the manager that makes them either engaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged.
I think I may have experienced that. Would you call it a culture, or is it a phenomenon?
Yeah, active disengagement. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I've seen that in some of the transformation projects that I've been called into, either
Sure.
not so much at the start, but fixed because they are, behind budget and time. And then you get some staff members there that, would say continuously against virtually everything. And I think maybe that's a symptom of really strong culture. That, if it's one person, maybe it's an anomaly, it's one off, but if it is systematic or it's widespread across the organization, you go, well, no, is that maybe a misdiagnosed strong culture, but the culture is maybe misaligned, or for whatever reason, the future, the purpose isn't aligned with currently the culture.
That's true. And if I were to tell you kind of our biggest discovery over the last few years, and it is that when you talk about employee engagement, 70% of the variance in employee engagement is because of the manager.
Oh,
so the
really?
manager, yeah, that's a huge number. So you can do whatever you want around process and systems and leadership and all of that, but if you don't have great managers, think about it from an agility point of view. Your scrum master or your manager, if that person is not somebody who, he might be an expert on agility and all of the stuff that you mentioned, the process and lean and waterfall and all of that.
Yep.
But if he cannot clarify expectations, if he cannot provide resources, if he cannot recognize people, coach them, encourage their development, people will leave. What level of agility are you talking about when you have terrible managers running your agility programs?
Okay, so do you see there? That's interesting. So those that just might have missed that. There was 70% of the reason for what staff leaving is because of the manager. Okay, so and then there's a lesson there for organizations about leadership, or so maybe managers rather. And then there's the difference of leaders and managers. Talk about is there a difference between leaders and managers? It's almost like, say, the boss and a leader. You see that little acronym or the meme where it's got the difference. You got like the guy's pulling a cart and the guy at the back with the whip and say, he's the manager, and then the leader is he's at the very front and he's pulling everyone. And you go, that's the leader. And then you go, okay, so if you've got a bad manager, how do you develop what do you need to do to that manager to develop a good manager out of them? Or are you trying to develop a leader?
Yeah, no, I'm of the view that managers should be leaders too, because this whole old-fashioned notion of leadership, is the people on the top and all of that. I wrote an article on this, and then the title of the article was leadership development needs to be democratized. Because sometimes when you think about leadership development, it's like all these elite leaders in the organization, usually in the headquarters, they'll have to go through this accelerated leadership program and all of that. Your managers, especially those in the front lines, operational managers, fantastic managers who actually are dealing with your customers, they need leadership skills as well. So I really feel that managerial skills, things like coaching, things like setting expectations, all these are essential competencies, if you may. But there are managers who are naturally talented at being managers, and I'm sure you've known or have had managers, Heath, who are always you always remember those managers. Made a huge difference in my life. Yeah. At the same time, you remember managers who you wish you never had. Cross paths with them, So I feel that, and great managers are rare. It's so when you find great managers, hang on to them. With this great resignation, the first thing I'd say is if 70% of the variance is employee engagement, hang on to your great managers. For the
Yeah.
others, they have some kind of conditional talent, provide them with training, provide them with some resources around how to coaching, how to carry meaningful conversations, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that's like the difference of that's like the difference between is a leader born or made?
We think that a lot of this talent is kind of innate. There's a difference between talent, skills, and knowledge. I can teach you how to be a good manager. I can give you a few skills. I can have you read a great book on great managers and all of that. But there are some people who have that innate talent to be managers. If they don't get the opportunities to be managers, then that's an issue. And then instead, you have people who should not have been managers.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself as a good manager, and I was a manager previously, and a terrible manager at that. And I'm much better as an individual contributor. So it's about, placing people in the area of their best talent too.
So I think that the key word there, what I try and push is competency. Is and part of that competency is knowledge, skills, and behavior. Being able to apply that knowledge in the right situation to the right degree, get the right outcome. As opposed to, like I said, talking to a young fellow just earlier today who has gone all the way through to almost PhD and never worked a day in his life. I said, you're almost an academic without any theoretical experience. So, but yeah, the competency is, that comes back to behavior. You need to be able to understand their environment to use your skill and knowledge in that particular way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the Great Resignation, and it's kind of, I don't know whether it's a global phenomenon. It's certainly in the US and maybe in the UK as well.
Yep.
But we strongly feel at Gallup that the biggest thing you can do is focus on your managers. I'll give you another book we recently released. It's called It's the Manager. As simple as that.
Oh, really?
It's the Manager.
Oh, really? It's the Manager.
It's the Manager. It's a wonderful book. And we wrote a book a long time ago, New York Times bestseller called First Break All the Rules.
First Break All the Rules.
First Break All the Rules a while ago, where we talked about all of this stuff, long time ago. And as I said, for the last 10 years, engagement has largely been unchanged. So with It's the Manager, we're kind of, coming back and saying this. So it was interesting that we found out in our research that it takes more than 20% of a pay raise to lure away from a manager who does a really good job of engaging you. If a manager is doing a great job of engaging you, it'll take you 20% or more pay raise to actually take them away. With managers who are creating active disengagement, it takes next to nothing to poach those employees. So when you think about retaining your talent, right? It's, again, with the manager, it's going to be so important that you support your managers and you care for them and so on, because the managers are dealing with enough already with remote working and priorities changing all the time. Supporting managers and equipping them is going to be your Great Resignation strategy, if you may.
Okay, that's a great tip there. Okay, so I think that's a good one, especially one as an organization generally, as in BAU, is to look after your managers, support your managers, make sure they've got everything they need to deliver on what they need to. But those also in transformation and change is that the managers is a key part of that, of keeping and retaining that staff, but maybe also attracting. And it's could be the opportunity there. Like I just did a HR transformation, and the big issue they were dealing with was servicing the HR division, servicing the line managers, and not being able to give them the support that they needed to support their guys. And so they're talking about how to develop the guys in a team to be managers. So I don't think it's widely. Maybe your research is going to highlight a bit more to the general public how the organizations need to focus more on managers. That's 20% increase in pay rise to get someone away versus you just actively disengage them, that is going to walk. Whoa.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of money on staff turnover that gets wasted from hiring, onboarding, induction, and then they don't like the manager, then they're going to leave, and then they'll repeat process.
Yeah. And again, in the book, we talk about the analysis we did on this massive database to understand the difference between engagement and outcomes. So we've seen if you are in a team that's highly engaged, the chances that you'll have higher profitability, higher customer engagement. So it's not just engaged employees for the sake of being engaged, but you're also translating that to your customers. Lower turnover. So you name the kind of outcome that's important to a leader. We can show you that engagement. If you're an engaged team, then you can deliver on that. But the key point there is, again, the manager, of course, but our engagement science and what we've developed over the years, there are kind of 12 conditions that you need to be able to be fully engaged in. Things like recognition and development. And an interesting one is a best friend. You need a best friend at work, which becomes all the more important. Is there somebody who watches your back? And so elements like these are critical to engage. But these elements are local, which means at the level of a team, you can actually drive that. So think about an agile team. And imagine in that agile team, you're teaching them the best process and all of that, but you're also doing all these things like giving them a best friend and recognizing them for the good work they're doing, giving them the resources, aligning them to the mission. So agility and engagement both need to work together in an organization trying to be agile and not just the process.
Okay, so the engagement with agility, and then you've got 12 points there to being engaged, part of that being recognition, development, support, being the best friend, and align, which and to the outcome of aligning to the activities to the mission. I see that with if you talk about locally and small teams, this is like grassroots, where you have developed that at the grassroots, and it takes hold, and then it grows and ferments and grows throughout the organization. Okay, so I prior to this call, I'll be honest with you, I've seen my exposure to engagement has really been on the change management side when I'm on these projects, and it's an activity that happens because of the project. But when outside of that project, I hear this speak of engagement, and I think it is prior to this was more a that espouse values we want to do and we say we do, but we in practice we don't do. But I can see now that the engagement is probably my personal view, maybe because I wasn't paying attention. It's like you buy a car that rare car, next thing you know, because you bought it, every other car is that same car. I will probably now see a lot of engagement. But in saying that, I think maybe now, and for the listeners about agility, engagement and agility, you've got to have them both together. Can't difference, I say disrespect, but need to acknowledge engagement. And if you get that right, there's benefits in many ways, probably both top line and bottom line if you're a finance guy and interested in profit and revenue, but also maybe even business owners about you keeping good staff, and you're not going to it's not going to cost you for high turnover. So a lot of benefits in a couple of books you mentioned. I think there was 3 in total that I'll put those in the show notes. It's The Manager. I think it's one of those books that you can tell what it's going to be like by reading the title. It's all about the manager, isn't it? And then First Break All the Rules. And there was one other one.
Well-being at work.
Well-being at work. Okay, alrighty. So I'll put, and is that your book, The Well-being at Work?
All of these are Gallup books.
Okay, so you would have been a contributor, as I read it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right. I know that you've got a hard stop, so we'll wrap it up there. But thank you very much, Vibhas. It's amazing. You've come from you've been the guest that has come from has both practical and also the research of Gallup background that can speak to the stats and say this is not theory. This is actually pulled out from this is what the market is doing. So some interesting ones there that the UK is losing to the US on a couple of things, but big indicator that I think what we say we're doing, we're not doing. So there's a few lessons there, I think, for the organization and transformations around about management. Pay attention to them, look after them, and that will help your business.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Okay, pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.